David Harrison stood in the middle of his company's boardroom, his face turning red as he pointed at the heavily pregnant woman sitting quietly in the corner. "This is why I don't hire women," he shouted, throwing papers across the table. "Look at her. She can barely fit in her chair, and now she thinks she can tell me how to run my company." Sarah Mitchell placed both hands on her swollen belly and looked down at the floor. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of everyone. Your idea is garbage, Sarah," David continued, his voice dripping with cruelty. "Just like I knew it would be. Go home and focus on being a mother. That's all you're good for now." The other employees in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Nobody dared to speak up. Nobody wanted to be the next target of David's anger. Sarah's hands trembled as she gathered her papers. The proposal she had worked on for 3 weeks lay scattered across the conference table. David had barely looked at it before dismissing it completely. "Sir, if you would just listen," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Listen." David laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the silent room. "I've been running Harrison Tech for 15 years. What could you possibly teach me? You're just a secretary who answers phones and makes coffee." Sarah stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. At 8 months pregnant, every movement took effort. She clutched her proposal to her chest and walked toward the door. "That's right, waddle away," David called after her, and several employees gasped at his cruelty. "Don't come back until after your maternity leave. Actually, don't bother coming back at all." Sarah stopped at the doorway. She turned to look at David, her face pale but her eyes suddenly fierce. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "When your company crashes and burns in the next 3 months, you'll remember this moment." David's laughter followed her down the hallway as she left. But what David didn't know was that Sarah's proposal contained the one solution that could save his dying company. And what Sarah didn't know was that in exactly 72 hours, Harrison Tech would face the biggest crisis in its history. A crisis that would make David Harrison come crawling back to her, begging for help. Let's go back to 3 months earlier, when Sarah's story really began. Sarah had always been a hard worker. She started at Harrison Tech right after college, 5 years ago. Back then, she was bright-eyed and excited, ready to prove herself in the technology industry. The company built software for hospitals and clinics. They helped doctors keep track of patient information, schedule appointments, and manage medical records. It was important work, and Sarah loved being part of it. At first, David had been kind to her. He praised her work and even gave her small bonuses when she did well. Sarah worked late nights and weekends, always trying to do her best. But things changed when Sarah got engaged to her fiancé, James. David became cold and distant. He stopped giving her interesting projects. Instead, he made her do boring tasks like filing papers and ordering office supplies. "Women always leave when they get married and have babies," David told her one day. "Why should I invest in training you when you'll just quit?" Sarah tried to prove him wrong. She worked even harder. She learned everything she could about the company's software. She studied their clients and understood their needs. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, she was terrified to tell David. She waited until she was 4 months along and couldn't hide it anymore. David's reaction was worse than she imagined. "I knew it," he said, shaking his head. "I knew you'd become useless eventually. Well, don't expect any special treatment around here. You'll work until the day you give birth, understand?" Sarah nodded, fighting back tears. She needed this job. James was still in school, studying to become a teacher. They relied on her income to pay rent and save for the baby. The months that followed were difficult. David gave her the worst assignments. He made her stand for hours at company events, even when her feet swelled. He scheduled important meetings at times he knew she had doctor's appointments. The other employees felt sorry for her, but nobody said anything. David was the boss, and everyone was afraid of losing their jobs. But Sarah noticed something during those difficult months. She noticed that Harrison Tech was in trouble. The company's biggest competitor, Medisoft Solutions, had released a new program that was faster and easier to use. Hospitals were canceling their contracts with Harrison Tech and switching to Medisoft. David held meeting after meeting, trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding. He hired expensive consultants who gave fancy presentations. He made the programmers work overtime to add new features to their software. Nothing worked. Sarah watched from her desk as David grew more desperate. She heard him on phone calls, trying to convince clients not to leave. She saw the financial reports that showed the company losing money every month. And then, one night when she was working late, Sarah had an idea. She was organizing old files when she found reports from 5 years ago. Back then, Harrison Tech had a special program that let patients access their own medical records from home. Patients loved it because they could see their test results and message their doctors without making phone calls. But David had canceled the program 2 years ago. He said it was too expensive to maintain. Sarah pulled up the old files on her computer. She read through everything, her heart beating faster as the idea grew clearer in her mind. What if they brought back the patient portal but made it better? What if they added features that Medisoft didn't have? What if they made it work on phones and tablets, not just computers? Sarah spent the next 3 weeks working on her proposal. She did research during her lunch breaks. She created charts and graphs showing how much money the new program could make. She interviewed nurses and doctors to understand what features they needed most. She knew David would never listen to her if she just suggested it casually. She needed to present it professionally, with evidence and data. Finally, her proposal was ready. Sarah requested a meeting with David and the management team. That's when everything fell apart. That's when David humiliated her in front of everyone, laughed at her pregnant body, and told her she was worthless. That's when Sarah walked out of Harrison Tech, swearing she would never return. She went home and cried for 2 hours. James held her and told her everything would be okay, but Sarah didn't believe him. She felt broken. She felt stupid for thinking David would ever respect her or her ideas. But then something changed inside Sarah. The sadness turned into anger. The hurt turned into determination. If David didn't want her idea, fine. She would take it somewhere else. Sarah spent the next week making phone calls. She contacted every tech company in the city. She pitched her idea over and over, refusing to give up. Most companies said no. They didn't want to hire a pregnant woman who would need maternity leave soon. But then Sarah called Medisoft Solutions. The CEO, Jennifer Walsh, was a woman who had built her company from nothing. She agreed to meet with Sarah the very next day. Sarah dressed in her best maternity clothes and took the bus to Medisoft's office building. Her back ached and her feet hurt, but she didn't care. This was her chance. Jennifer listened to Sarah's entire presentation without interrupting. When Sarah finished, Jennifer smiled. "This is brilliant," Jennifer said. "This is exactly what we need to crush Harrison Tech once and for all." Sarah's heart soared. Finally, someone believed in her. "There's just one problem," Jennifer continued. "You're about to have a baby. I can't start a major project with someone who won't be here in a few weeks." Sarah's hope crashed. "Not again." "But," Jennifer said, holding up her hand, "I'm willing to make you a deal. You give me your proposal and I'll implement it. When you're ready to come back after your baby is born, I'll hire you as a full-time product manager with double whatever Harrison was paying you." Sarah couldn't believe it. This was more than she had dreamed possible. "There's one condition," Jennifer added, her eyes twinkling. "I want you to be here when we launch the new program. I want you to see David Harrison's face when he realizes what he lost." Sarah shook Jennifer's hand, and the deal was done. Over the next month, Medisoft worked day and night to build Sarah's program. They called it Patient Connect, and it was everything Sarah had imagined and more. Patients could see all their medical records on their phones. They could schedule appointments with a single tap. They could message their doctors and get answers within hours. They could even connect with other patients who had similar health conditions for support. The programmers at Medisoft added features that Sarah hadn't even thought of. They made the interface beautiful and easy to use. They made sure it worked perfectly on every device. Meanwhile, Harrison Tech continued to fall apart. More clients canceled their contracts every week. David laid off 20 employees to save money. The office felt like a ghost town, with empty desks and worried faces everywhere. David tried everything he could think of. He lowered prices so much that the company barely made any profit. He promised clients new features that his programmers couldn't deliver. He even tried to copy Medisoft's software, but it was too late and too obvious. Nothing worked because David had made one critical mistake. He had laughed at the one person who could have saved him. Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl on a Tuesday morning. She named her Emma, and she was perfect. 3 weeks later, while Sarah was at home feeding Emma, her phone rang. It was Jennifer Walsh. "Turn on the news," Jennifer said, barely able to contain her excitement. "Channel 7. Right now." Sarah grabbed the remote and switched to Channel 7. The headline made her gasp. Harrison Tech faces bankruptcy as major hospital system cancels contract. The reporter stood outside Harrison Tech's office building, explaining how Memorial Hospital System, the company's largest client, had just ended their relationship with Harrison Tech. Memorial Hospital representatives say they're switching to a new program called Patient Connect from Medisoft Solutions, the reporter said. This represents a loss of over $12 million in annual revenue for Harrison Tech. The camera cut to an interview with a doctor from Memorial Hospital. "Patient Connect is revolutionary," the doctor said. "Our patients love it, and it makes our jobs so much easier. We should have switched years ago." Sarah's hands trembled as she held Emma. This was really happening. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. 5 more hospital systems signed up today. Your program is a huge success. David Harrison's office has been calling us nonstop. Sarah smiled. She knew exactly what David wanted. He wanted to know how Medisoft had beaten him so completely. He wanted to know where Patient Connect had come from. And soon, very soon, he would find out the truth. The phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. Sarah almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Sarah? It's David Harrison." His voice sounded different. Smaller. Desperate. "I need your help," he said, and Sarah could hear the panic in his words. "The company is dying. I've lost almost everything. I know I treated you badly, but please. I'm begging you. Come back and help me save Harrison Tech." Sarah looked down at baby Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. She thought about all the times David had been cruel to her. All the times he had made her feel worthless. All the times he had laughed at her and dismissed her ideas. "I'll think about it," Sarah said calmly. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow." She hung up before David could respond. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Emma was awake every few hours wanting to be fed, but that wasn't why Sarah stayed up. She kept thinking about David's phone call. Part of her wanted to tell him no and let Harrison Tech fail. He deserved it after everything he had done. But another part of her, a bigger part, wanted something else. She wanted David to know the truth. She wanted him to understand exactly what he had lost when he laughed at her. And she had the perfect plan for how to make that happen. The next morning, Sarah called David back. "I'll help you," she said. "But only if you agree to my conditions." "Anything," David said immediately. "Name your price." "I want you to hold a company-wide meeting tomorrow afternoon," Sarah said. "I want every employee there. I want the local business reporters there too. And I want you to give me 30 minutes to speak." There was silence on the other end of the line. "That's it?" David asked, confused. "You just want to give a speech?" "That's it," Sarah confirmed. "Done," David said. "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Sarah hung up and smiled. David had no idea what was coming. She called Jennifer Walsh next. "I need you to do something for me," Sarah said. "Anything," Jennifer replied. The next afternoon, Sarah walked into Harrison Tech's office for the first time in 2 months. She carried Emma in a baby carrier on her chest, and James walked beside her holding her hand. The conference room was packed. Every employee was there, looking confused and worried. 3 business reporters sat in the back with their cameras and notepads. David stood at the front of the room, looking thinner than Sarah remembered. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. When David saw Sarah, his face lit up with hope. "Everyone, please welcome back Sarah Mitchell," David announced. "She's going to tell us how to save our company." Sarah walked to the front of the room and set her notes on the podium. Emma stirred in the carrier but stayed asleep. "Thank you for coming," Sarah began, her voice steady and clear. "3 months ago, I stood in this very room and presented an idea to Mr. Harrison. An idea that could have saved this company and made it stronger than ever." The employees leaned forward, listening carefully. "Mr. Harrison laughed at me," Sarah continued. "He told me my idea was garbage. He told me to go home and focus on being a mother because that's all I was good for." David's face went pale. He started to speak, but Sarah held up her hand. "He humiliated me in front of all of you," Sarah said. "He mocked my pregnant body. He fired me and told me not to come back." The room was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing, their pens frozen above their notepads. "So I took my idea somewhere else," Sarah said. "I took it to Medisoft Solutions." David's eyes went wide with shock and horror. "That's right, Mr. Harrison," Sarah said, looking directly at him. "Patient Connect, the program that's destroying your company, was my idea. The idea you laughed at. The idea you called garbage." Several employees gasped. One person started crying. David stumbled backward and sat down heavily in a chair. "I came here today not to save your company," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, "but to make sure you understand exactly what your cruelty cost you. You lost a $12 million contract. You're facing bankruptcy. You've had to lay off dozens of loyal employees." Sarah paused and looked around the room at all the worried faces. "And it's all because you underestimated a pregnant woman." The reporters were writing frantically now, their cameras flashing. At that moment, Jennifer Walsh walked into the conference room. "Hello, everyone," Jennifer said warmly. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, CEO of Medisoft Solutions. I'm here today to make an announcement." She walked to stand beside Sarah. "Medisoft Solutions is acquiring Harrison Tech, effective immediately," Jennifer announced. "We're buying the company, all its assets, and all its contracts. Every employee here will keep their job, but you'll now be working for Medisoft." Relief flooded through the room. People started hugging each other, crying tears of joy. "There's one more thing," Jennifer said, smiling at David. "Mr. Harrison, you're fired. Sarah Mitchell will be taking over as the new director of this division." David's mouth fell open. He looked from Jennifer to Sarah and back again, unable to speak. "Pack your office," Jennifer said coldly. "Security will escort you out." As security guards approached David, he finally found his voice. "Sarah, please," he begged. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't do this." Sarah looked at the man who had made her life miserable for months. The man who had mocked her and belittled her. She felt Emma shift against her chest, and suddenly all the anger drained away. "I'm not doing this for revenge, Mr. Harrison," Sarah said quietly. "I'm doing this because I'm good at my job. I always was. You were just too blind to see it." She turned away from him and addressed the employees. "Everyone, please take the rest of the day off," Sarah said. "Come back Monday ready to work. We have a lot to do, but I promise you this, under my leadership, no one in this company will ever be treated the way I was treated." The employees applauded. Some came up to hug Sarah and congratulate her. As David was being escorted out of the building, he passed Sarah one last time. "I really am sorry," he said, and for the first time he sounded sincere. Sarah nodded. "I know. But sorry doesn't change what happened. It only changes what happens next." Then David Harrison walked out of his own company for the last time, while the woman he had laughed at stepped into his office and sat down at his desk. But Sarah's victory was just the beginning. Because when word spread about what happened at Harrison Tech, something unexpected occurred that would change Sarah's life in ways she never imagined. And David Harrison, broke and humiliated, was about to discover that his worst nightmare was far from over. The news spread like wildfire. By that evening, Sarah's story was everywhere. The business reporters who had witnessed David's downfall wrote articles with headlines like "Pregnant Secretary's Revenge" and "Boss Who Mocked Employee Loses Everything." The videos went viral on social media. Millions of people watched the footage of David being escorted out of his own company while Sarah stood tall with baby Emma on her chest. Sarah's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News channels wanted interviews. Magazines wanted to feature her story. Companies from all over the country called offering her jobs. But Sarah ignored most of it. She was exhausted. Being a new mother was hard enough without suddenly becoming famous. "You should rest," James told her that night as Emma finally fell asleep. "You just had a baby 2 months ago. You don't need all this stress." "I know," Sarah said, but she couldn't stop checking her phone. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't explain what. Then, at 11 o'clock that night, Sarah received an email that made her blood run cold. The sender was David Harrison. The subject line read, "You haven't won yet." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. "Dear Sarah, congratulations on your victory. You humiliated me in front of the world. You took my company. You destroyed my reputation. I hope it felt good. But you made one mistake. You assumed I would just walk away and accept defeat. I won't. I'm going to show everyone that Patient Connect isn't as perfect as you think. I'm going to expose problems with the program that will make Medisoft wish they never hired you. By the time I'm done, you'll lose everything you just gained. Sleep well, David." Sarah read the email 3 times, her heart pounding. "James," she called out, her voice shaking. "Come look at this." James read the email and frowned. "It's just empty threats. He's angry and trying to scare you. Ignore it." But Sarah couldn't ignore it. She knew David. When he was backed into a corner, he became dangerous. She forwarded the email to Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer called her immediately. "Don't worry about David," Jennifer said. "He's finished. He has no money, no company, no power. What can he possibly do?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But that's what scares me." The weekend passed without incident. Sarah tried to relax and focus on Emma, but David's threat kept echoing in her mind. On Monday morning, Sarah went to work at her new office. It felt strange sitting in David's old chair, looking out the window he used to look out of. The employees welcomed her warmly. They brought her flowers and cards. Many of them apologized for not standing up for her when David had been cruel. "It's okay," Sarah told them. "What matters is that we move forward together now." Sarah spent her first day meeting with different departments, learning about ongoing projects, and making plans for the future. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Sarah's assistant knocked on her door. "There's someone here to see you," she said nervously. "He says it's urgent. His name is Robert Chin, and he's a lawyer." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Send him in." A man in an expensive gray suit walked into her office. He carried a leather briefcase and had the cold eyes of someone who enjoyed bad news. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, not offering to shake hands. "I represent David Harrison. I'm here to inform you that my client is suing you for theft of intellectual property." Sarah felt like she'd been punched. "What?" "Mr. Harrison claims that you developed Patient Connect while you were employed by Harrison Tech," the lawyer explained. "According to your employment contract, any ideas or inventions you create while working for the company belong to the company, not to you." "That's ridiculous," Sarah said, standing up. "I developed that idea after he fired me." "Do you have proof of that?" the lawyer asked with a thin smile. "Dated documents? Witnesses? Time-stamped files?" Sarah's mind raced. She had worked on the proposal for 3 weeks before the meeting where David fired her. She had used her work computer. She had done research during work hours. "I thought so," the lawyer said when Sarah didn't answer. "My client is demanding that Patient Connect be transferred back to Harrison Tech, along with all profits it has generated. If you refuse, we'll see you in court." He placed a thick envelope on her desk. "You've been served. Have a nice day, Ms. Mitchell." After he left, Sarah sat down and put her head in her hands. Emma was at home with James, and suddenly Sarah wanted nothing more than to be there with them, away from all of this. She called Jennifer immediately. "He's suing us," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "David is claiming Patient Connect belongs to him." There was a long silence on the phone. "Does he have a case?" Jennifer asked quietly. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Maybe. I did start working on it while I was still his employee." "We need to talk to our lawyers right away," Jennifer said. Don't panic. We'll figure this out. But Sarah was already panicking. Over the next 2 weeks, lawyers took over Sarah's life. They asked her thousands of questions. They demanded to see every document, every email, every note she had written about Patient Connect. The legal team found problems. Sarah had used her work computer to do some of the research. She had printed some documents on the company printer. She had even sent herself emails from her work account with ideas about the program. This isn't good, Medisoft's head lawyer told Sarah and Jennifer in a private meeting. Harrison has evidence that Sarah was developing this idea while she was employed by him. Legally, he might own it. But he fired her, Jennifer argued. He rejected her idea. He told her it was garbage. That doesn't matter, the lawyer said. The contract is clear. Any work product created during employment belongs to the employer, whether they use it or not. Sarah felt sick. What happens if we lose? If we lose, we have to give Patient Connect to David Harrison, the lawyer said. Plus pay him damages for the profits we've made so far. That could be tens of millions of dollars. Jennifer looked at Sarah. We might have to settle. Give him some money to make this go away. No, Sarah said firmly. I won't give that man a single dollar. He doesn't deserve it. Sarah, if we go to court and lose, Medisoft could be destroyed, Jennifer said gently. I believe in you, but we have to be realistic. That night, Sarah barely slept. Emma cried every 2 hours, and normally Sarah didn't mind the nighttime feedings. But tonight, every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's smug face. He had planned this perfectly. He had waited until she felt safe and victorious, and then he had struck. And the worst part? He might actually win. The next morning, Sarah was feeding Emma when James brought her the newspaper. You need to see this, he said, his face grim. The headline made Sarah's blood boil. Tech Wonder Girl's stolen idea? David Harrison fights back. The article painted David as a victim. It described how his loyal secretary had stolen his company's valuable intellectual property and given it to his competitor. It mentioned that David had lost everything while Sarah had become rich and famous. The article even included quotes from David. Rusted Sarah like family, David said in the interview. I gave her opportunities. I believed in her. And she betrayed me in the worst possible way. All I want is what's rightfully mine. There was no mention of how he had treated her. No mention of his cruelty. No mention of him laughing at her pregnant body. Sarah's phone started ringing with reporters wanting her comment. Social media, which had been celebrating her just days ago, suddenly turned against her. Maybe she did steal it, people wrote online. She seems too good to be true. Poor David Harrison. He didn't deserve this. I knew there was more to the story. Sarah watched her reputation crumble in real time. At work, employees who had been friendly became distant. They whispered in corners and fell silent when she walked by. Even some of Medisoft's clients started asking questions. 2 hospital systems called Jennifer to express concerns about Patient Connect's legal status. Sarah felt like she was drowning. We have to settle, Jennifer told her 1 week later. I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am. But David is willing to drop the lawsuit if we pay him $5 million. $5 million. For an idea he had called garbage. For a program he had refused to even consider. He's blackmailing us, Sarah said. Yes, Jennifer agreed. But if we don't pay, we risk losing everything in court. Our lawyers say we only have a 50-50 chance of winning. Sarah looked out her office window at the city below. Somewhere out there, David was celebrating. He had found a way to win after all. I need 24 hours to think about it, Sarah said. That night, Sarah couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She paced her apartment while James held Emma and watched her with worried eyes. Maybe you should just pay him, James said softly. It's not worth your health. Emma needs her mother. Sarah knew he was right. But something inside her refused to give up. There had to be a way to prove that Patient Connect was her idea, not David's. There had to be evidence somewhere that would show she had created it independently. Sarah sat down at her computer and opened her old files. She went through every document, every email, every note from the past year. There had to be something. Anything. At 2 in the morning, Sarah found it. Hidden in a folder she had forgotten about was a voice recording from 4 months ago. Before David had fired her. Before the big meeting. Sarah had been practicing her presentation at home, rehearsing what she would say to convince David. She had recorded herself on her phone to improve her delivery. With trembling hands, Sarah played the recording. Her own voice filled the quiet apartment. "Mr. Harrison, I've been thinking about how to solve our client retention problem. What if we brought back the patient portal but made it mobile-friendly and added new features?" The recording was dated 2 days before the big meeting. And most importantly, it was recorded on her personal phone, at her home address, at 9 o'clock at night. It wasn't perfect proof, but it was something. Sarah called Jennifer, even though it was the middle of the night. "I found evidence," Sarah said. "I have a voice recording that proves I was working on this idea at home, on my own time, using my own equipment." "Send it to me right now," Jennifer said, suddenly wide awake. Sarah sent the file, and Jennifer forwarded it to their lawyers. The next morning, the legal team called an emergency meeting. "This changes things," the head lawyer said, listening to the recording. "It's not conclusive, but combined with the fact that Harrison rejected your idea, it strengthens our case significantly." "So we don't have to settle?" Sarah asked hopefully. "We still might want to," the lawyer said carefully. "But now we have leverage. We can negotiate a much lower amount, maybe $1 million instead of $5 million. Or," Jennifer said slowly, a dangerous smile spreading across her face, "we could go to war." Sarah looked at her new boss and saw the same fire in her eyes that Sarah felt in her own heart. "What did you have in mind?" Sarah asked. "We take this to trial," Jennifer said. "We expose David for what he really is. We show the world how he treated you. We make sure everyone knows he rejected this idea before you took it elsewhere." "That's risky," the lawyer warned. "If we lose, the damages could bankrupt both of you." "I know," Jennifer said. "But I'm tired of men like David Harrison getting away with treating women like garbage and then profiting from their cruelty." She turned to Sarah. "It's your choice. We can settle and make this go away quietly. Or we can fight." Sarah thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully at home. She thought about all the other women who had been treated the way David had treated her. She thought about what kind of world she wanted her daughter to grow up in. "We fight," Sarah said. The lawyer sighed. "But understand this, the trial will be public. Every detail of your employment will be examined. David's lawyers will try to destroy your character. They'll dig up every mistake you've ever made. They'll make you look bad in any way they can." "Let them try," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I have nothing to hide." Over the next month, both sides prepared for battle. David hired the most expensive lawyers in the city. He gave interview after interview, playing the role of the wronged employer. Sarah and Jennifer worked with their legal team day and night, building their case. They gathered evidence of David's pattern of discrimination against women. They found other former employees who had been mistreated. They collected emails showing David's cruel behavior. The trial date was set for 6 weeks away. During those 6 weeks, Sarah barely saw Emma. She felt guilty every time she came home late and found her baby already asleep. "This is my fault," Sarah told James one night as they lay in bed. "I should have just accepted the settlement. I'm putting my family at risk because of my pride." "It's not pride," James said, pulling her close. "It's principle. And Emma will be proud of her mother for standing up for what's right." 3 days before the trial was set to begin, Sarah received another email from David. This one was different. "Sarah, please. Let's stop this. I'll drop the lawsuit completely if you just admit publicly that you got the idea while working for me and give me credit as a co-creator of Patient Connect. I don't even want money anymore. I just want people to know I wasn't the villain in this story. Please." Sarah read the email twice. David sounded desperate, even scared. She called Jennifer. "He wants to settle. He'll drop everything if I just give him credit." "Don't do it," Jennifer said immediately. "That's what he wants. He knows he's going to lose in court, so now he's trying to salvage his reputation. If you give him credit, people will always wonder if you really did steal from him." But if I refuse and we lose in court, I'll lose everything, Sarah pointed out. Trust me, Jennifer said. We're going to win. I have one more piece of evidence that I haven't told you about yet. Something that's going to destroy David's case completely. What is it? Sarah asked. You'll see at the trial, Jennifer said mysteriously. Just trust me. Sarah wanted to trust Jennifer. But she was terrified. She looked at the email from David one more time, her finger hovering over the reply button. All she had to do was agree to his terms, and this nightmare would be over. She could go back to being a normal mother with a normal job. No more lawyers, no more courtrooms, no more stress. But then she remembered the look on David's face when he had laughed at her in that boardroom. She remembered how small he had made her feel. She remembered him telling her she was only good for being a mother. Sarah closed the email without replying. If Jennifer said they had evidence that would win the case, Sarah had to believe her. The trial would begin in 3 days. And Sarah had no idea that what happened in that courtroom would shock everyone, including her, and would lead to a revelation that would change everything she thought she knew about David Harrison and his past. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled with reporters, curious spectators, and employees from both Harrison Tech and Medisoft. Camera crews lined the back wall, ready to broadcast every moment. Sarah sat at the defendant's table next to Jennifer and their team of lawyers. Her hands were folded in her lap, but inside she was trembling. Across the aisle, David sat with his lawyers. He wore an expensive suit and looked confident, almost smug. He caught Sarah's eye and gave her a small, cold smile. All rise, the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. Be seated, she said, settling into her chair. Let's begin. David's lawyer stood up first. His name was Richard Sterling, and he was famous for winning impossible cases. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, Sterling began, his voice smooth and confident. This case is very simple. My client, David Harrison, employed Sarah Mitchell for 5 years. During that employment, Ms. Mitchell signed a contract stating that any intellectual property she created belonged to Harrison Tech. He walked toward the jury, making eye contact with each person. While employed by my client, Ms. Mitchell developed a software program called Patient Connect. She used company resources, company time, and company equipment to create this program. Then, when my client's company faced financial difficulties, Ms. Mitchell stole this valuable property and gave it to his biggest competitor. Sterling paused dramatically. This isn't a story about a brave woman standing up to a mean boss. This is a story about theft. Plain and simple theft. He returned to his seat, looking satisfied. Sarah's lawyer, a woman named Diana Torres, stood up. She was younger than Sterling but had a reputation for being fierce. Your Honor, what Mr. Sterling just described is fiction, Torres said firmly. The truth is very different. Yes, Sarah Mitchell worked for David Harrison. Yes, she signed an employment contract. But Patient Connect was created after Mr. Harrison fired her, rejected her ideas, and humiliated her in front of her colleagues. Torres pulled up a video on the courtroom screens. We have footage from the meeting where Mr. Harrison told Ms. Mitchell, and I quote, "Your idea is garbage. Go home and focus on being a mother. That's all you're good for." The courtroom gasped as the video played. There was David, red-faced and angry, throwing papers across the table. There was Sarah, heavily pregnant, trying not to cry. Several jury members frowned as they watched. After this meeting, Mr. Harrison fired Ms. Mitchell, Torres continued. She took her rejected idea and developed it independently, on her own time, with her own resources. She then partnered with Medisoft Solutions, a company that actually valued her intelligence and creativity. Torres walked closer to the jury. This case isn't about theft. It's about a man who made a terrible mistake, rejected a brilliant idea, and now wants to profit from that idea anyway. The first day of trial continued with both sides presenting their evidence. David's lawyers showed Sarah's work computer records, proving she had done research during work hours. They showed emails she had sent herself from her work account. They brought in technology experts who testified that the early development of Patient Connect must have happened while Sarah was still employed. It looked bad for Sarah. Even Torres seemed worried. But she kept telling Sarah, "Wait for tomorrow. Trust me." That night, Sarah couldn't eat dinner. James held Emma while Sarah paced their apartment. "What if we lose?" Sarah said. "What if I have to give David everything?" "We won't lose," James said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Torres said she has something big planned for tomorrow. "But what?" Sarah asked. "What could possibly turn this case around?" The next morning, Sarah arrived at the courthouse early. She found Torres already there, looking excited. "Today, everything changes," Torres said with a mysterious smile. "Tell me," Sarah begged. "I can't take the suspense anymore." "Just wait," Torres said. "Trust me, it will be worth it." The trial resumed at 9 o'clock. David's lawyers finished presenting their evidence, looking confident. Then it was Torres's turn. "Your Honor, I'd like to call my first witness," Torres said. "I call Margaret Harrison to the stand." The courtroom went silent. Sarah's eyes went wide. David's face turned pale. An elderly woman walked into the courtroom. She had white hair and kind eyes, and she moved slowly with the help of a cane. David stood up suddenly. "No," he said. "No, no, no." "Mr. Harrison, sit down," Judge Morrison ordered. "Your Honor, I object," Sterling said frantically. "This witness has no relevance to the case." "I'll decide what's relevant," the judge said coldly. "Proceed, Ms. Torres." The elderly woman was sworn in and sat down. "Please state your name for the record," Torres said gently. "Margaret Harrison," the woman said in a soft voice. "And what is your relationship to David Harrison?" "I'm his mother." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "Order." David put his head in his hands. "Mrs. Harrison, thank you for coming today," Torres said. "I know this must be difficult. Can you tell us why you agreed to testify?" Margaret looked at her son with sad eyes. "Because I can't let him do this anymore. I can't let him hurt another person the way he's hurt so many others." "What do you mean?" Torres asked. "My son has a pattern," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "He steals ideas from his employees and claims them as his own. He's done it for years." The courtroom exploded. Reporters started typing furiously. David looked like he wanted to disappear. "Order!" Judge Morrison shouted, banging her gavel repeatedly. "Mrs. Harrison, that's a serious accusation," Torres said. "Do you have proof?" "Yes," Margaret said. She pulled out a folder from her bag. "I have documents, emails, and testimony from 7 other former employees of Harrison Tech. All of them created ideas or programs that David took credit for." Torres took the folder and handed copies to the judge and to Sterling. Sterling's face went white as he flipped through the pages. "Your Honor, I need to speak with my client immediately," Sterling said. "We're in the middle of testimony," Judge Morrison said sternly. "Your Honor, please," Sterling begged. The judge sighed. "Fine. 15-minute recess." During the recess, Sarah watched through the courtroom windows as David and his lawyers had a heated argument in the hallway. David was shouting, his face red. Sterling was shaking his head. Margaret Harrison walked over to Sarah. "I'm sorry for what my son did to you," Margaret said quietly. "I've watched him become cruel and arrogant over the years. I tried to stop him, but he never listened to me. When I saw what he did to you, how he treated you when you were pregnant, I knew I had to do something." "How did you know about the other employees?" Sarah asked. "I hired a private investigator," Margaret said. "When Jennifer Walsh contacted me and told me about the lawsuit, I knew this was my chance to finally stop David. I found 7 people he had stolen from. They were all afraid to speak up before, but now they're ready to tell their stories." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. When the trial resumed, Sterling stood up. "Your Honor, my client would like to withdraw his lawsuit," Sterling said quietly. The courtroom erupted again. This time, Judge Morrison let the chaos continue for a moment before restoring order. "Mr. Harrison, is this true?" the judge asked. "You're dropping the case?" David stood up slowly. He looked defeated, broken. Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that by withdrawing, you're admitting you have no claim to Patient Connect? Yes, Your Honor, David said, his voice barely audible. Judge Morrison nodded. Very well. Case dismissed. She banged her gavel and it was over. Sarah sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Jennifer grabbed her hand and squeezed it. We won, Jennifer whispered. Sarah, we won. Reporters swarmed them as they left the courtroom. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted from every direction. Torres stood on the courthouse steps and made a statement. Today, justice was served. Sarah Mitchell has been fully vindicated. Patient Connect is her creation, developed independently after she was wrongfully terminated. David Harrison has withdrawn all claims and admitted he has no ownership of the program. The reporters turned to David, who was trying to leave through a side exit. Mr. Harrison, is it true you've stolen ideas from multiple employees? Mr. Harrison, do you have anything to say to Sarah Mitchell? Mr. Harrison, how does it feel to lose everything? David pushed through the crowd without answering and disappeared into a waiting car. Sarah watched him go, and surprisingly, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt sad. Are you okay? James asked, appearing beside her with Emma in his arms. I don't know, Sarah admitted. I thought I'd feel happy when this was over. But I just feel empty. That evening, after the news coverage died down and Sarah was finally home with her family, she received one last email from David. Sarah, you were right about everything. I was cruel. I was arrogant. I deserved to lose. I'm sorry for what I did to you and all the others. I'm selling my house and using the money to compensate the employees I stole from. It won't fix what I did, but it's a start. I'm leaving the country and starting over somewhere else. I hope someday you can forgive me. David. Sarah read the email twice, then showed it to James. Do you forgive him? James asked. Sarah looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. I don't know yet, Sarah said honestly. But maybe someday. 2 weeks later, Sarah returned to work at Medisoft. The employees threw her a celebration party. Patient Connect was now being used by over 100 hospitals across the country, and more were signing up every week. Jennifer promoted Sarah to Vice President of Product Development with a generous salary and full benefits. You earned this, Jennifer said. Not because you won the lawsuit, but because you're brilliant and brave and exactly the kind of leader we need. Sarah settled into her new role, balancing motherhood with her career. It wasn't easy. Some days she felt overwhelmed. Some days she felt guilty for working long hours. Some days she wondered if she was doing anything right. But then she'd remember that little girl in the boardroom, being laughed at for daring to have an idea. And she'd remember that she had stood up for herself. She had fought back. She had won. 6 months later, Sarah was invited to speak at a technology conference for women in business. She stood on stage in front of 500 women and told her story. She talked about David's cruelty, the lawsuit, and the victory. But she also talked about doubt, fear, and the moments when she almost gave up. Success isn't about being fearless, Sarah told the crowd. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway. It's about knowing your worth even when others try to diminish it. It's about standing up not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. The audience gave her a standing ovation. After the speech, dozens of women came up to share their own stories. Stories of being dismissed, mocked, and underestimated. Stories of fighting back and winning. Stories of losing but learning. Sarah listened to each one, offering encouragement and advice. One young woman, barely out of college, approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. My boss told me yesterday that my ideas were stupid, the young woman said. He said I should focus on looking pretty and let the men handle the thinking. I was going to quit. But then I saw your story on the news and I changed my mind. Tomorrow, I'm going to his boss and reporting his behavior. Thank you for giving me the courage. Sarah hugged her. Thank you for not giving up. That night, lying in bed next to James with Emma sleeping between them, Sarah felt truly at peace for the first time in months. She had started this journey as a secretary who just wanted respect. She had endured humiliation, fought a legal battle, and risked everything. And now she was a vice president, a mother, and a voice for women everywhere who refused to be silenced. David Harrison had laughed at her once. He had called her worthless. He had tried to destroy her. But Sarah Mitchell had done something far more powerful than destroying him in return. She had proven him wrong. Patient Connect went on to become the most successful medical software program in the country. Within a year, it was being used by over 500 hospitals and had helped millions of patients access their healthcare information. Sarah continued to rise through the ranks at Medisoft. 3 years later, when Jennifer Walsh retired, she named Sarah as the new CEO. As for David Harrison, true to his word, he left the country. Sarah heard through mutual acquaintances that he was living in Europe, working as a consultant for small businesses. He never returned to the technology industry. Margaret Harrison stayed in touch with Sarah. They met for coffee once a month, and Margaret loved playing with Emma. She told Sarah that David was seeing a therapist and trying to become a better person. "I hope he succeeds," Sarah told Margaret one afternoon. "Not for his sake, but because the world needs fewer people who tear others down." On Emma's 5th birthday, Sarah received a package in the mail. Inside was a children's book with a note. "Dear Sarah, I heard Emma is 5 now. I wrote this book for children about treating everyone with kindness and respect. I hope she enjoys it. I'm sorry I had to learn these lessons the hard way, and I'm sorry you had to suffer for my education. Thank you for being stronger than I ever was. David." Sarah read the book to Emma that night. It was actually quite good, with beautiful illustrations and a meaningful message. "Mommy, who wrote this?" Emma asked. Sarah thought for a moment. "Someone who made big mistakes but is trying to do better." "That's good," Emma said sleepily. "Everyone should try to do better." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead and smiled. Years later, when Emma was old enough to understand, Sarah told her the whole story. She told her about being laughed at in the boardroom, about fighting back, about standing up for what was right even when it was scary. "Were you scared, Mommy?" Emma asked. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "But being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway." Emma hugged her mother tight. "I want to be brave like you." "You already are," Sarah said. "And you'll be even braver because you're growing up knowing your worth. You won't have to learn it the hard way like I did." Sarah Mitchell's story became legendary in the business world. It was taught in business schools as an example of resilience and integrity. It was shared on social media as inspiration. It was told and retold, each time reaching someone who needed to hear it. But for Sarah, the story was never really about revenge or justice. It was about a woman who refused to be small. It was about a mother who wanted her daughter to grow up in a world where women's ideas mattered. It was about turning pain into purpose and humiliation into power. David Harrison had laughed at his pregnant secretary, never imagining the consequences. He lost his company, his reputation, and his place in the industry he had once dominated. But more than that, he had created his own worst enemy by underestimating someone who had the courage to prove him wrong. And in the end, Sarah didn't just save a company. She changed an industry. She inspired a generation. And she showed the world that sometimes the person you dismiss is exactly the person who will define your downfall. The boss who laughed learned his lesson too late. But thanks to Sarah Mitchell, countless other bosses learned it in time. And millions of women learned something even more important. Their ideas matter, their voices count, and no one has the right to make them feel small. Sarah's story wasn't just about one woman's victory. It was about every woman who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or mocked for daring to be brilliant. And it was a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, eventually finds its way. The end.